since the time this whole process began with the S-600 installation standard, the CRI, one of the prime movers and shakers in this, has pulled out. Now that we're getting close to the end of this, when this will be finally completed, how does that change the ballgame? The fact that the carpet manufacturing community, it looks like, will be completely divorced from this.
Well, I don't want to dodge the question, but it kind of remains to be seen. Quite frankly, we've got to play that. Yes, they have withdrawn from the process. When our initial agreement to start this, the WFCA and the CRI were 50-50 equal partners, and within the last few months, they've elected that they don't want to play in the process anymore and have withdrawn their support. WFCA has picked up the ownership of it. We still absolutely are committed to it. We see the goal and the need. So the standards are still on track. It slowed us down a little while we got the processes all reviewed, but it's on track. When it's done, the WFCA will own the standard. And one of our primary missions is, we're to do things to protect and help support the independent retailer out there. And we think this is absolutely a critical thing for our industry to have, so that, first of all, there's never been a rule book. It's always an interpretation. I think one of the things that's going to be the most interesting is to see how this plays out with inspection. Because, we all gripe about the inspection process and how it's uneven and inconsistent. Well, there really hasn't been a definitive guidelines, that these inspectors are to go by. Now we finally, it's no different having a rule book in baseball or football or driving a car down the street. There's got to be some rules before you can have interpretations of them. So
now there will be one.
Now there will be one, and I think, the mill's involvement's probably a little overstated, at this point anyway, as far as the CRI is concerned. If they want to participate in the process, fine. If they don't, I think a lot of the logic and a lot of the reason why this whole project was embarked upon back when still exists. We need to be able to train installers to certain standards. We need to be able to test them to certain standards. Somebody walks in the front door of this business we're sitting in and says, I'm here and I'm an installer and I've passed these certifications, or I am up to date on that. Their employability, whether it be as an employee or whether it was, you retain as a subcontractor, becomes almost automatic. Quite frankly, in today's world, as bad as you need installers, but it gives the installer something to come in with, with the concrete evidence that they know a little bit about what they're doing. We have nothing like that in the industry today.
How will you make this available to people in the field? And the reason asking that question is I've had people on this program say, I understand people are going to have to pay for this, or this will be available through some entity at a cost. Is that the way this will be dispersed?
Well, the WFCA is going to own it. To say that there may be some cost for the document, there may be some, minor cost as far as, actually covering the production and distribution of the document, but it's not going to be onerous at all. We don't have a number. I'm
That's
not dodging your question.
Really, then.
No, we're talking the cost of a meal. It's just not. It's nothing that's going to hold anybody back. It's just a matter of the cost actually of the publication. And then we're still working right now. We're having meetings as soon as next week, as far as going into, how we're going to implement this, what the training process will look like. We have to get a training document, because you can't just go in and lay the whole thing down in front of an installer and say, there it is, absorb it. That's not real. That's not going to happen.
Well, and there has to be a hands-on. Much of it is technique, is it not?
Yeah, a lot of it's technique, but a lot of it's, an ANSI document, it's not allowed, and we don't call out brand names. We can't say use this type of adhesive or this type of tack strip. That's not what this is all about. What we can say, though, is that you need, sundries and supplies. Tack strip must be so wide and have so many rows of pins, just as an example,
Yeah.
So, it's a protection for the customer. It keeps her from getting this cheap,
Yeah.
Call it what it is. A lot of supplies out there are just kind of minimal, and it compromises the quality of an installation. Some customers don't care, and that's all they want to pay for.
So it establishes what, minimum quality, something like that?
Yeah, minimum quality. Things that installers, a lot of it is hand techniques. What installers should do, what an installation should look like, what the difference between an outline stair installation and a waterfall stair installation should look like. There's one whole chapter on how to upholster steps. Quite frankly, this is a how-to document as much as anything. And if I were training, if I had an apprentice program, whether it be through a school or whether it be through a store that was trying to train their own installers, I think this would be a great document, because now we're all consistently doing things the same way, even-handedly.
So then, going forward, you said somewhere the third quarter, I think you said, this will be a completed document after these many years, and every hurdle you could imagine, it seems like.
Man, it's been a perfect storm. I mean, we haven't got enough film in that camera to talk about everything that has changed within our industries and our organizations in the last 5 years. But it started out to be, it was told we'd be about a 4-year process, so it was never meant to be quick.
It's not that bad then.
We're a year behind.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sugarcoating it, but it's not like it was supposed to take 5 weeks and it took 5 years. It's not quite that bad. But,
well, I wasn't getting into the time span necessarily, but you had mentioned you're getting ready, training the trainers, which will be dispersed. Talk about how that likely will play out.
Well, it's going to be available through various entities. I mean, some of the, not to call out all the names, but several of the unions or install programs, things like that, they will certainly have this available to them where they'll train their own people. They have schools and they do a nice job, and they're not going to have to come to an outside third-party organization to get trained. We will just make it available where they can have the book, if you will, and establish their own curriculum and get the thing trained. If people have in-house installation workrooms, things of that nature, I would anticipate that they would be able to get the curriculum and do training, per the instructions that we'll have there. Then that leaves the rest of the world, and I am sure that there are going to be regional train the trainer things. Again, we're a little sketchy on detail just simply because we don't have a time frame. We're getting to where we know pretty close, but once we hand this thing to ANSI and say, review it and bless it, that's kind of like sending it off to the government and they'll send it back. Someday you'll get it in the mail. There is not an absolute deadline on it.
You can't imagine it will be quick, but whatever. One of the things, and I've been to installation seminars where you were one of the leaders, and there was a request for a show of hands for people who had ever heard or who had used CRI 104, 105, which had been the standard or something that was looked at as a standard up until now, and not a whole lot of hands went up. I've also heard similar stories in ceramic tile where the handbook, which looks like the Manhattan phone book, same question, same response.
Yeah.
That's a challenge to change that. How can you even hope to do that?
Well, it's got to start at the top. And by that, I mean it's got to be important to the store owners. It's got to be important to the workroom owners, the union leaders, whatever. If they see the value in it, then, they will impart it and show the value to the installers, and hopefully the good share of them will buy in. Under the present setup and system, the guidelines that exist in this business today really don't mean too much to the individual installer. You know, there's very little there that would hold them accountable. There's very little there that probably help them or teach them, and I'm not being critical of what exists. That's why we set out to have better standards 5 years ago, but you know, no, they haven't heard of them, but the reality is, how could they have heard of them, and why would they have heard of them? You know, most installers don't sit around looking for what the rules are that posted somewhere online. If stores don't tell them this is important, if they have no formal training, you know, I'm surprised any of them have heard of them, quite frankly, simply because, you know, it has not been promoted to them. You said a few minutes ago, we need to figure out how to go promote and sell this project to the flooring world, and I'll assure you we're working on that.
Well, it is quite a, you know, it's quite a project, it would seem to me. I mean, I suppose if there were some magic way to get it in their hands, as you said, it wouldn't mean a lot to a lot of people.
This has been a fulfilling project in many respects, Dave, and in others, it's kind of like a lot of things. If you knew what you're getting into when you said yes, you might have rethought the answer. But having gotten this far into it, now's not the time to stop. You know, there's now we got to see the implementation of it. That's going to be the real key.
Well, you were saying that getting into this thing 5 years ago, nobody had expected it would be as treacherous as it was, but you're really just starting right now. I mean, now you have it. Now the ball game begins.
Yeah, it's taken this long to agree. And it hasn't been a necessarily disagreeable process. I don't want to leave you with that impression. The meetings and all we had factions in the room that quite frankly hadn't agreed on much in the last few years. And we had pretty harmonious meetings.
That's maybe the biggest story out of this. People that wouldn't even be in the same room at the beginning ended up producing a heck of a fine piece of work.
I think when we're all done, we're going to forget it took 5 years, and we're going to say it's a pretty saying I use all the time is, you know, people don't want to hear about the labor, they just want to hold the baby. I think that's kind of where this is going to be. You know, we're really probably going to forget the time it took, and, you know, the late night phone calls and the airplanes you had to get on and all the things it took to get this done. And when the results are done, plus one thing about an ANSI document, it does have to be reviewed periodically. I believe it's every 5 years, so that if people will get to have some continuing education. That's another problem our industry has. We have installers out here that getting gray in the temples that may have learned things the correct way, but that was 10, 15 years ago. And everything has changed, you know, as far as the backings on the material, speaking to carpet now, the temperatures, the fibers, the tapes, the tools, it's all changed. And yet we have nothing that mandates that they have any type of continuing education. We have very little of an avenue, a pipeline for them to get this education. If I knew how to, you know, service and maintain and overhaul a automobile, just pick on somebody here, you know, if I was a General Motors mechanic 15 years ago and I had it down cold, how many things do you think have changed in the last 15 years?
Everything?
Yeah. I mean, now you'd be restoring cars. You know, you wouldn't be fixing them, you'd be restoring them, because everything, the tools, the techniques have changed. We're not quite that high tech in this industry, but trust me, we got guys out here still burning seams like they were doing it 15 years ago, because it's the only way they ever learned, and nobody's told them a reason to change. So not only is this going to be a bit of a change on the upfront for many of our dealers and installers out there, but it's going to be something I hope that we can go forward and keep them continuously in the loop better as